Hey guys, tonight we're setting off across the Pacific, not with a GPS in your pocket, but with nothing more than the sky above, the waves under your canoe, and your own nerves to steady you. You're perched on a carved wooden deck that rocks slightly with each swell. The horizon is fading into velvet, and stars are beginning to prick the heavens like shy lanterns. The canoe feels alive, humming beneath you, and you probably won't survive this if left alone, let's be honest. But somehow, centuries ago, Polynesian navigators did survive, and more than that, they thrived. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and I'd love to know where are you listening from, and what's the local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky above is your compass. As the canoe noses out past the reef, the stars rise one by one from the east, exactly where they always do. You glance to your right, and there's Sirius, the brightest star you'll see all night, shimmering like a restless diamond. You don't just think, pretty. You think, east by southeast. Navigators weren't stargazers for fun. They read the sky like a map that never failed well, unless a storm swallowed the heavens. But we'll get there. Every star had a rising and setting point on the horizon, and Polynesians memorized these as if the sea itself had been divided into countless invisible roads. You don't mark north, south, east, and west with a compass rose. Instead, you fix your gaze on where certain stars pop up. When Aldebaran peeks its red eye over the waves, you know that's a specific bearing. The way a street sign anchors you in a city grid. Historians still argue whether the earliest voyagers plotted entire courses by pre-selecting constellations, or if they just winged it with a mix of instinct and experience. It wasn't just navigation, it was art, science, and survival. A navigator might track stars not only as they rose, but also how they shifted during the hours, like watching the hands of a cosmic clock. You sit there, night breeze tugging at your hair, pretending you're not thinking about how seasick you'd already be. Joke S on you. Polynesian navigators trained themselves to feel the difference between north, south, and east-west swells, so vomiting overboard would just mean one more data point about the ocean's direction. Picture yourself learning this from childhood. Instead of bedtime stories about superheroes, you'd be quizzed. Where does Vega rise? Where does Canopus set? Miss too many questions, and your family might never trust you with a canoe. Fun pressure, right? Except, your people's survival genuinely depended on whether you could recite these sky maps without stumbling. Forget Netflix marathons. Your entertainment is chanting star names in a rhythm so steady it would put you to sleep if the stakes weren't so high. By now, darkness has swallowed the horizon, but you don't panic. You're tuned in. You've noted the last visible line of twilight just enough to recall where east lay. You feel the canoe's bows shiver with each push of the paddle, and you align it with a star that will serve as your midnight guide. If that star climbs too high, you slide your gaze to another rising one, swapping markers seamlessly. Think of it like switching your phone's navigation app when the battery starts to drain, except no battery, no app. And if you pick the wrong one, you drift into nothingness. Even clouds couldn't fully cheat you. A skilled navigator could track the memory of a star, continuing its course in their mind until it reappeared from behind a drifting bank. Some oral traditions even say navigators carried the whole sky in their head, rotating it mentally as the night passed. That's like trying to juggle a Rubik's cube and a Sudoku puzzle in the dark while standing on a moving treadmill. And yet, somehow, they made it look calm and effortless. Your modern brain itches to ask, but what about when they got it wrong? Well, they did. We have accounts of voyages where land was missed, and a canoe wandered for days. Some ended in miraculous discoveries of new islands. Others ended, well, less cheerfully. Yet, here's the strange part. Even when mistakes happened, the methods endured. The stars always rose. The stars always set. The error was in human eyes, never the heavens. And so, as your canoe glides deeper into the night, you relax just a little. The stars above no longer feel like distant ornaments. They're road signs, old friends pointing the way across a world where the sea is endless and the sky never. The sky feels heavier now, packed with stars that seem to drip down to the horizon like glowing beads on a black curtain. You keep your gaze steady, letting your eyes dart from one to the next until you notice a strange pattern forming. Not a pattern of shapes, like modern constellations, but pathways, lines of rising and setting stars that run across the ocean like invisible highways. This is the star compass, the greatest GPS you'll ever find without batteries or cell service. And unlike your phone, it doesn't freeze in the middle of nowhere. The Polynesian star compass ISNT, something carved into wood or painted onto cloth inside the navigator's mind. Imagine a circle around you, divided into 32 named points. Each point corresponds to where a specific star rises or sets. You don't think northeast or southwest. Instead, you think Hikianalia for one direction, New for another. These weren't just labels, they were memory hooks. When you say them out loud, you're not just pointing somewhere. You're invoking a mental map that has been passed down for generations. You might assume this compass is static, But here's the fun twist. It shifts depending on where you are in the Pacific. A star rises at a slightly different angle if you re in Hawaii compared to Tahiti. Navigators had to adjust constantly, recalibrating their mental compass the way you de-adjust your Google Maps if you realized it thinks you're re-walking when you re-actually on a bus. Historians still argue whether there was a standardized Polynesian star compass or if each island group developed its own flavor of the system. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. To keep all of this in memory, navigators used chants. You picture yourself sitting on the canoe, repeating lines in a soft monotone. Hoku rises here, Kalia sets there. A rhythm builds, almost like a lullaby. Except this lullaby doesn't send you to sleep, it keeps you awake, focused, locked into the infinite dome of the sky. Miss one line, and the next island might slip by unseen in the morning haze. There's also the matter of star paths. Some stars just rise and set. They track across the sky along routes that can be followed for hours. You pick one and keep the canoe's bow lined up with it until dawn. That's your night's road. But of course, stars shift with the seasons. The ones you use in June won't be visible in December. That meant a navigator had to carry not just one sky map, but 1 for every month. Imagine juggling that in your head. Suddenly, memorizing the lyrics to your favorite song doesn't sound so impressive. And yet, the star compass wasn't just practical, it was poetic. Each star had a name, often linked to a story. When you whispered those names into the night, you weren't just reciting data. You were calling out to ancestors, reliving myths, connecting navigation with identity. You weren't alone in the dark. You were surrounded by voices woven into the stars themselves. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some oral traditions suggest that navigators would test their compass by deliberately closing their eyes, spinning in place, and reopening them to check whether they could instantly identify the correct star points. It was like a night sky version of a sobriety test, except instead of avoiding jail time, you were avoiding death at sea. You sit back on the canoe's deck, wind brushing against your cheeks, and imagine the pressure. Everyone aboard depends on you. They trust that your chants, your star compass, your whispered bearings are accurate. If you hesitate, they notice. If you second guess, they worry. So you keep your voice calm and steady, like a meditation guide, even if your stomach churns with doubt. And sometimes, you couldn't even use stars. Clouds rolled in, storms blotted out the sky, and your precious compass disappeared. That's when the navigator's skill really mattered. Could you hold the star positions in your mind until the skies cleared? Could you keep the canoe pointed true in total darkness? Historians still argue how often this happened and how navigators compensated, but it's likely they relied on a mix of memory, ocean feel, and maybe just a little stubborn optimism. So you sit there, rocking on the waves, your invisible compass glowing in your imagination. No needles, no magnets, no screens. Just you, the night, and a galaxy that refuses to let you down as long as you remember its language. The stars fade a little behind thin veils of cloud, and suddenly you feel the importance of another guide entirely, the swells rolling under your canoe. Out here, the ocean isn't just water, it's a living texture of ripples, long waves and crosscurrents that tell their own story. You crouch low, fingertips grazing the deck as the canoe tips with. To the untrained, it feels like random rocking. To you, or rather to a practiced Polynesian navigator, it's a library of signals. Swells are like fingerprints. Each island creates its own pattern as waves wrap around it, refract, and bend outward across the sea. Even in total darkness, a navigator could feel the direction of an unseen island by how those swells changed. You try to imagine that, closing your eyes, feeling the canoe roll a little stronger on the left side than the right, and knowing instantly, land lies somewhere in that direction. Historians still argue whether navigators mapped these swells systematically or whether it was an instinctive talent honed by years of exposure. Either way, it worked. Here's where it gets quirky. Some voyagers claimed they could sense swells not just with their balance but through their skin. Sitting barefoot on the planks, they let the vibration of each wave seep up into their bones, almost like feeling the bass at a concert. Except instead of dancing, you're just trying not to steer your canoe into oblivion. There are even accounts of navigators lying flat on their stomachs, eyes closed, like they were sunbathing at midnight, to absorb the song of the swells through their ribs. The ocean never offers just one swell. Trade winds push long, steady waves in one direction. A storm hundreds of miles away might send a secondary swell slanting across it. Add in the signature of nearby islands, and you get a crisscrossed field of motion that would drive most of us to seasick despair. But a skilled navigator teased out the dominant rhythm, the way a DJ singles out the beat hidden beneath all the noise. Once you locked onto it, you could hold your course even if the stars were gone. And this wasn't only at night. During the day, you'd confirm your direction by looking at the swell patterns against the horizon. At night, it became pure sensation. You adjust your stance, letting your knees bend, rocking gently with the canoe so the balance feels natural, and slowly, a truth reveals itself. The ocean has memory. Waves can travel thousands of miles, carrying whispers of lands you haven't seen yet. The navigator's body is the receiver, tuned to frequencies modern instruments often ignore. Of course, mistakes happened. Misread a swell, and you might steer off course for hours. There are stories of canoes wandering off into dead zones of conflicting currents where the ocean feels like it's tugging in every direction at once. Imagine being out there in pitch black, no stars, no clear swell, just chaos. The crew's eyes would be on you, silently asking if you really knew what you were doing. Your only option, pretend you did. But when it worked out, it was magic. You'd be hundreds of miles from land, and suddenly you'd notice a subtle change in rhythm. A faint crosswell bending around something solid ahead. You couldn't see it yet, but you knew an island was out there. For the crew, that moment was hope incarnate. For you, it was proof that the ocean, however vast, always left breadcrumbs for those patient enough to listen. Here's a detail you won't find in every history book. Some Pacific navigators spoke of swells as though they were relatives. Each pattern had a personality, a behavior you could anticipate. This one is strong and steady like an older brother, they might say, while that one is tricky, playful, and hard to trust. Giving swells character wasn't just poetic, it helped embed them in memory, turning abstract wave physics into a story you could recall even half asleep. And yes, sometimes you would be half asleep. Long voyages demanded endurance, and the navigator didn't always get to rest, so they'd drift in and out of light sleep, one hand on the deck, still tuned into the pulse of the ocean. That's right, these people were basically the original sleep navigators. Not recommended for your morning commute, but surprisingly effective when survival depends on multitasking in the middle of the Pacific. So tonight, as the wind hums in your ears and the stars slip in and out of hiding, you lean down and feel the ocean's rhythm. It's not random. It's never random. And for just a moment, you believe that maybe, just maybe, you could read the swells too. The night deepens, and the stars have done their job for now. But you're learning that the ocean is never a single source textbook. The navigator's eyes shift downward, scanning for darker shapes against the horizon, even though you can barely make them out. What they're really looking for isn't the island itself, but the signs the island leaves in the sky and air. And that's where clouds and birds step into the picture. Islands create their own weather. Warm air rises off the land, pulling moist sea air upward. That means a pile of clouds will often park itself above an island, like a lazy guest who refuses to leave. In the daytime, this is obvious, a white puff drifting nowhere while other clouds wander freely. But even at night, you can sense it. The clouds above an island are darker, more stubborn, often flashing with subtle light as the moon reflects differently off their bellies. You tilt your head back and think, that's not just a cloud, that's a lighthouse made of mist. Historians still argue whether navigators identified these signs from dozens of miles away, or if that's an exaggeration layered into oral tradition. Either way, it's believable when you remember how much sharper the senses grow when your life depends on them. And then, of course, there are the birds. By day, they're companions. By night, they're messengers. You notice them at dawn and dusk, wings flashing like tiny shadows against the dim glow. Some species travel out to sea each morning to hunt, but always they return to land at night. Navigators memorized which birds flew furthest, which ones hugged the coastline, and what their flight paths meant. A frigate bird spotted at sunset. Land has to be close because those birds don't land on water. A naughty tern fluttering low. You might be within a day's sailing of a reef or small island. Here's the quirky part. Bird behavior became part of the navigator's lore, almost like gossip, that birds are liar. Some traditions would say, warning about species that zigzagged unpredictably. Others were trusted allies, practically given honorary crew status. Imagine depending on a seabird's bedtime routine to decide whether you steer east or west. It's both absurd and completely genius. You lean against the side of the canoe, straining your eyes in the moonlight. Clouds loom on the horizon, thicker in one spot than the rest. Could that be land? You glance upward, then down, then back at the flock of faint silhouettes you've been watching. They're circling, not aimlessly but with purpose. They know where home is, and if you're wise, you'll follow their lead. You almost laugh at the thought. Humans crossing entire oceans by bird watching forget satellites. Sometimes it comes down to squinting at seagulls, but it wasn't just sight. Navigators sometimes listened for birds. Their cries carried over water at night. A sudden chorus of shrieks could mean land nearby, or it could mean some unlucky fish was being torn apart on the surface. Either way, it was information. And in the middle of an empty ocean, you take information wherever you can get it. Of course, this method wasn't flawless. Historians still argue whether certain migrations confused navigators, luring them in the wrong direction. Imagine chasing a flock that seems headed towards safety, only to realize they're migrating hundreds of miles, not commuting to their home reef. That's a nasty surprise when your crew already thinks you're part magician, part survivalist. One wrong bird, and the entire canoe's faith in you wobbles. But when it worked, the payoff was enormous. You'd steer toward the signs, feel the swells shift, and soon smell the faint trace of vegetation on the wind. The crew would sigh in relief, even before land appeared. That cloud bank, that bird call, they weren't just nature's background noise, they were the whispered promises of home. You chuckle softly at the irony. In modern times, you might complain if a seagull steals your French fries. For these voyages, the same bird was basically a glowing blue checkmark saying, yes, you're still alive, land is out there. So you sit quietly, rocking with the swells, eyes on the clouds, ears tuned for wings. The ocean is never silent, never blank. It's crowded with clues if you know how to notice them. The canoe rocks gently, and your gaze shifts downward, not to the sky, not to the clouds, not even to the birds, but to the sea itself, a shifting stage that glimmers under the moon. Most people see water as a blank sheet, identical everywhere, but you, crouched low with salt spray drying on your lips, begin to notice that the surface is never uniform. It's a living map, one that Polynesian navigators read like scripture. Foam lines, for instance. When two currents collide, they leave streaks of foam on the surface, sometimes stretching farther than the eye can see. To the untrained, it looks like random sea froth. To you, it's a road sign saying, boundary here, current shifting. Navigators used those lines to confirm their course, knowing that certain foam trails led reliably toward known channels. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was codified into formal maps or left as oral hints passed from teacher to apprentice. Either way, those streaks of bubbles carried meaning. Then there's color. Yes, even at night, moonlight can reveal subtle differences in shade. Shallow reefs gleam faintly turquoise, while deeper waters soak up the light into inky black. You blink hard, doubting your eyes, but the old navigator beside you nods knowingly. That slight glow, that's a reef, that darker stretch just beyond. That's the channel you must steer through. One wrong choice, and you'll hear the sickening crunch of a hull splitting against coral. Nothing like reef roulette to keep you awake at 2 a.m., and then perhaps the most magical cue of all bioluminescence, tiny plankton glow when disturbed. Sparkling trails that flare under the canoe's bow. It's beautiful enough to make you forget you're exhausted, but beyond the beauty lies utility. Disturbed patterns of glowing plankton can reveal hidden reefs, shoals, or even the slope of an island rising unseen beneath the waves. Some traditions suggest navigators could literally see land under the surface thanks to these glowing hints, like nature's own fiber optic cables. Quirky, absolutely. But when your survival depends on scraps of evidence, even glowing algae become trusted allies. You lean closer, staring at the shifting tapestry. A streak of foam angles northeast. A faint glowing patch drifts just off the starboard side. You realize you're being handed multiple signals at once, layered like overlapping clues in a puzzle. The genius wasn't spotting one sign, it was combining dozens into a single story. Foam plus glow plus color equals reef nearby. Reef plus crosswell plus circling birds equals land ahead. Suddenly the ocean stops being chaos and becomes a detective novel with clues on every page. There's an eerie side, too. Bioluminescence could be a comfort, but sometimes it spooked crews. Tales speak of ghostly lights flickering across the water at night, mistaken for spirits or omens. Historians still argue whether these legends were exaggerated or whether unusual glow events caused by dense plankton blooms genuinely unsettled sailors. You can imagine it exhausted, anxious, and suddenly the whole ocean around you lights up like a cosmic neon sign. Peaceful, but also terrifying if you don't have a scientific explanation handy. And speaking of quirks, here's one. Some navigators supposedly tasted the sea to confirm its story. That's right, slurping salt water like a fine wine. Subtle differences in salinity hinted at currents, and the taste might change near a river-fed island. Imagine being the guy on the canoe who swears, "Yep, this water tastes like Tahiti." You'd laugh, but you'd also keep paddling in that direction. You sit back, the night pressing heavy on your shoulders, but the sea beneath you is anything but blank. It's filled with textures, streaks, colors, and faint glows that whisper of unseen dangers and hidden safe passages. The navigator doesn't panic when stars vanish behind clouds. Instead, they lean harder into the sea's language, knowing the ocean is as articulate as the sky. A joke forms in your tired brain. Out here, even the plankton are better tour guides than your phone's map app. At least they never lose signal. So you rest your hand on the gunwale, watching foam trails curl, watching sparks of light bloom and fade. For a moment you realize you're not drifting aimlessly. You're walking through a library, except the shelves are waves and the books are written in foam and glow. And if you can read them, you'll never be lost. The night wind stiffens, brushing your cheek with a damp coolness, and you realize that air itself is as much a map as the stars or waves. Polynesian navigators didn't treat the wind as random background noise. They listened to it, smelled it, felt it on their skin. The breeze wasn't just comfort or curse, it was a teacher. You sit upright, hair whipping in one direction, and think, is this the steady trade wind, or is it shifting? The trades usually blow from the east, strong and reliable, practically the conveyor belts of the Pacific. If you're steering westward and the trades hold steady, you feel reassured. If they slacken or change tone, it might mean a storm brewing or land somewhere interfering with the air's usual course. Salt spray adds another layer. At first it just stings your lips and makes you feel sticky, but navigators read even that. Finer spray carried farther at night could mean the wind is picking up. A sudden dryness on your skin might mean you've entered a wind shadow behind an island. The canoe itself became a salt-sprayed barometer, coated with invisible clues about what lay ahead. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some traditions describe navigators licking their arms or tasting their lips to confirm changes in spray density. Forget fancy instruments. Sometimes you just needed to know if the ocean was extra salty tonight. Historians still argue whether this was a consistent practice or an embellished teaching story, but the idea isn't far-fetched. Survival makes you notice things most of us would dismiss as background irritation. Humidity played its part too. Imagine the air thickening, heavy with moisture. Even when the sea looks calm, that might mean you're approaching land, where evaporation from vegetation loads the breeze with extra water vapor. You can't see the island yet, but you can feel it in your lungs. It's like the island exhales before you ever lay eyes on it. Sound matters as well. Wind whistles differently depending on the rigging, the hull, and the angle of approach. A steady hum reassures you are on track. A sudden shift in pitch is like your canoe clearing its throat. Pay attention, something changed. At night, with vision limited, these subtle sound cues become a symphony you can't afford to ignore. And yes, sometimes the wind lied, or at least it played tricks. A passing squall could temporarily distort patterns, and inexperienced sailors might think they defound the breath of an island, when really they were just brushing the edge of a storm. Historians still argue whether navigators had systematic ways to test these false positives, or whether experience alone sorted truth from deception. Either way, the stakes couldn't be higher. Misread the wind, and you risk steering the crew into chaos. Imagine yourself now, eyes closed. You tilt your head, letting the air wash across your face. You notice the faintest shift, a cooler thread cutting through the warmth, as if the night itself whispered a secret. You open your eyes, nod subtly, and the crew adjusts course without needing words. Everyone trusts that you've heard something they haven't. It feels almost supernatural. But it's really just years of training your senses into instruments sharper than any compass. Of course, it wasn't all solemn concentration. You can picture navigators cracking jokes at the expense of apprentices. Taste the spray. Boy, does it say Tahiti or humor kept spirits afloat even when the winds didn't cooperate, and maybe the teasing doubled as training, because laughter has a way of locking lessons into memory. So the night stretches on, and while most of the crew dozes fitfully, you stay awake, half listening, half breathing, fully attuned to the invisible streams in the air. Every shift matters. Every sigh of the wind is a message. You're not just riding the breeze, you're translating it, phrase by phrase, into survival. And as spray freckles your arms and the salt tightens on your skin, you realize the ocean is never silent, never still. Even the air is busy telling you where to go. You continue your walk, finding yourself in the cloister, where rows of columns surround a square garden. The monks walk here after meals, their steps slow, their voices hushed. Some pray as they walk, their lips moving silently. Others let their eyes fall to the earth, where herbs and small vegetables grow between carefully arranged paths. This garden is not only for beauty but for survival. Mint, sage, thyme, and garlic grow here, plants used to flavor otherwise bland meals and to treat common illnesses. You pause, leaning against a cool stone pillar, and you imagine the rhythm of monastic life. Eat, pray, work, walk, sleep, then repeat, day after day, year after year. At the far corner of the cloister you hear a soft trickling. A fountain spills water into a small basin. For the monks, water is life, but it is also ritual. They wash before meals, not out of vanity but out of obedience, for cleanliness is tied to purity. You imagine dipping your hands into the cool basin, feeling the clarity of the water, and then drying them on the rough cloth provided nearby. Even something as ordinary as washing before eating becomes a sacred gesture here. The bell rings again, not loud but steady, calling the monks to their next task. Some carry small baskets filled with herbs. Others head toward the refectory to prepare the next humble meal. You follow them quietly, your footsteps echoing on the stone floor. In your mind, you see the monks not as weary men but as threads in a great tapestry of time, each one bound by rules, by prayers, by routines that stretch across centuries. Their food may be plain, their lives austere, but there is dignity in their simplicity. As you walk, you catch the faint smell of onions and boiling water drifting from the kitchen once more. The air feels warmer here, charged with the anticipation of sustenance. Bread will be sliced, vegetables chopped, lentils stirred into a thick soup. Nothing will go to waste. You think of how different your own meals are, full of choice, abundance, perhaps even indulgence, and yet here, within these walls, simplicity is enough, perhaps even more than enough. You continue forward, your breath slowing as if you too have taken up the rhythm of monastic time. Outside, the world is filled with noise, markets, wars, endless voices, but here, behind the walls, the sound is soft. The murmur of prayer, the clatter of bowls, the rustle of robes. You realize this quiet life is not dull but deliberate. Each bite of bread, each sip of water, each shared silence is a reminder of devotion. And so, step by step, you move deeper into their world, until it feels as though you belong to it too. Imagine now the longing you would feel for sweetness. A Byzantine monk could go months, even years, without tasting sugar as you know it. Sugar, imported at great expense from distant lands, was a luxury reserved for courts and palaces. Instead, the monastery's sweetness was drawn from honey. Thick, golden, fragrant honey was collected from hives maintained by some communities, though it was always in short supply. When added to porridge or stirred into water, it transformed plain food into something almost celebratory. Fruit was another form of sweetness, though seasonal and fleeting. In late summer, figs ripened and filled the cloisters with their syrupy scent. Grapes hung heavy on vines in monastery gardens, sometimes pressed into raisins to store through winter. Apples, pears, and pomegranates appeared when the season allowed, and the monks treated them as rare delights rather than daily staples. When dried fruit became an important companion in the cold months, a reminder of sunlight when days grew short. Still, the longing for sweetness never left. When honey was absent and fruit stores ran dry, monks drank thin water or ate plain boiled wheat. Their diet mirrored their spiritual discipline, resisting temptation, denying the body's craving for pleasure. Yet when the abbot permitted a spoon of honey on a feast day, you would taste not just sugar but the sudden spark of joy, gratitude, and a reminder of creation's hidden luxuries. The memory of those rare flavors lingered long after, a sweetness savored not just on the tongue but in the soul. Now picture yourself entering the monastery's refectory, the long stone hall where monks gathered for their daily meals. The air carried the mingled scents of boiled lentils, bread, and smoke from the small hearth. Long wooden tables stretched across the room, but you would not hear the lively chatter of a medieval tavern. Instead, there was silence, thick, almost sacred silence. Monks sat side by side, bowls before them, but their mouths were not for conversation. They were for prayer, for nourishment, for quiet endurance. Speaking during meals was forbidden in most communities. If something was needed, an extra spoon, a refill of water, it was signaled with gestures, small and discreet. Words were reserved for chanting, praying, and reciting scripture, not for the common act of eating. The silence was broken only by the sound of spoons tapping wooden bowls, bread being torn by hand, or the steady voice of a reader. For as you ate, another monk stood at a lectern and read aloud from scripture or from the lives of the saints. Every bite of porridge, every sip of water, was taken to the rhythm of sacred words. It was as if the food and the scripture were meant to blend, nourishing body and soul together. This practice stripped meals of any sense of indulgence. Eating was not about pleasure, but about necessity, a reminder that even at the table, discipline reigned. For a new monk, silence could feel heavy, almost suffocating, but over time that silence became a rhythm of its own, a reminder that you were part of a larger body bound not by conversation but by quiet devotion. At last, there were moments when the gray monotony of lentils, bread, and boiled greens gave way to something brighter. These were the feast days of saints, when the rigid order of the monastic diet bent just slightly to celebration. Imagine the monastery kitchen that morning, alive with a rare energy. Fires burned hotter, pots clattered louder, and the smells drifting through the cloisters were richer than usual. On such days the table might hold fish, spiced more generously, or cheese, pulled from storage and shared with smiles that broke through the usual solemn faces. Honey could appear on bread, or dried figs placed carefully in bowls. For men used to thin gruel and rough loaves, these small additions tasted like feasts fit for kings. The abbots allowed these moments not just to nourish the body, but to remind the monks that joy, too, had its place in service to God. It was an echo of heavenly banquets promised in Scripture, a small foretaste of divine reward. And though the rules never vanished, there was a softness in the air on feast days. The silence of the refectory remained, but it was touched with an unspoken gratitude, a shared understanding that even strict lives could hold sweetness. For a young monk, these days were treasured. There were markers in the endless calendar of fasting and plain meals, sparks of light that could carry one through long winters of austerity. In the careful balance of denial and reward, the monastery kept both discipline and hope alive. And so, as you drift deeper into the rhythm of their lives, you begin to sense what hunger truly meant for these Byzantine monks. It was never just an emptiness of the stomach, though the gnawing pain was constant. It was a chosen companion, a shadow at their side, shaping their days and nights alike. Hunger sharpened their prayers, slowed their movements, and kept their minds tethered to the thought of God. Imagine lying in the cool stone dormitory, the rough wool blanket scratching against your skin. Your body is weak from weeks of fasting, yet your spirit feels strangely light. Hunger becomes a teacher, whispering that the flesh is fragile, fleeting, but the soul endures. The emptiness inside is a vessel, waiting to be filled with something greater than food. And yet, there was also the quiet suffering, the small complaints muttered in silence. Some monks struggled, dreaming of roasted meats they would never taste again. Others grew ill, their thin frames unable to bear the burden of constant denial. Hunger was both a discipline and a danger, but in that balance between survival and sacrifice, meaning was found. The monastery was not a place of comfort, nor was it meant to be. It was a crucible. The diet of lentils, bread, herbs, and occasional honey-shaped bodies into shadows, but sharpened faith into something unyielding. And for those who endured, hunger became not just a trial, but a kind of truth. As you close your eyes now, perhaps you can feel the faint echo of that discipline. A table bare but for bread, a bowl of lentils steaming gently, silence all around, and the slow beating of your own heart. The lesson of the monks lingers. The body will always hunger, but the soul can be fed in other ways.